Hello, my name is Houston, and this is Media Mood Board. Yes, my name is Houston, and this is Media Mood Board, a show about hyper-specific entertainment lists. Today, I'm counting down my favorite video games released in 2023. Despite what it may look like in the background, it is not 10 p.m. at night. It is 5:30, which is just how things are in the winter. If you're watching this close to release, I hope you had a great holidays. Now, as far as games go, I don't follow a lot of games journalism anymore outside of a couple of British publications, but I always try to peek back in halfway through the year or at the end of the year just to see what people are talking about outside of my own bubbles. And the consensus is that it's been an incredible year for video games. As a disclaimer, I personally didn't play that many games that came out this year that I even felt like I wanted to finish. But there were a ton of games that came out this year. So I'm just going to show briefly the games that are stacking these end of year lists that I didn't get a chance to play and might have ended up on here if I had gotten the chance to play them. Both from big budget studios, as well as from indie developers. So with that disclaimer out of the way, Number 5, The Making of Karateka. The Making of Karateka is an interactive documentary profiling the lead-up and production of one of the first cinematic video games ever produced, Karateka, released for the Apple II in 1984. One of the reasons that I really like this game is because how different it is from a lot of games that I've, air quotes, played. Because this is basically an interactive museum exhibit. It's kind of like a walking sim. It's kind of like a visual novel. It's kind of like a PowerPoint presentation. It really sparked my imagination and made me excited about games that will be inspired by this game. The basic gameplay of this game, some people may even argue that it's not a game, is you choose a chapter, and then it pops up a timeline of various nodes. Each node will include a video interview or scans of design documents or letters or photographs with text associated with it that tells you a little bit what it's about. It can also be animation frames, and you can go backwards and forwards through them. Sometimes the nodes will go vertically, where it will dig deeper into a specific part of it. There'll be correspondence between publishers and creators, and it breaks down the story of the impetus for something and then its growth into something bigger. For instance, Karateka was made in the 80s, and it was designed and built by one person who's intellectual European father composed the music for. And so we have interviews with the dad, we have videos of him rotoscoping his karate teacher, and then the illustrations that he did from that to then inform the animations in the game. And then occasionally the nodes will be these really exciting literal games. It'll be different versions of a game in progress. So it's kind of this communication between the world that it's telling and then what they're talking about. So you'll see here is the lead up to Karateka was this game he made called Deathball or something. And so you get to play an early build of Deathball, and then you'll see this back and forth between either his own diaries or a back and forth with someone who's trying to publish it. And then you'll see the next version of it with those implemented notes until we finally reach a more finalized version of it. And a cool thing that Digital Eclipse, the development team, has done is in collaboration with the creator of Karateka, any of the games that they show multiple versions of, they also have kind of a remastered version that they've made modernly to kind of realize what his vision would look like in a modern day game. Everything in this package is just so loving and special, and I'm so used to, especially when there's a repackage of a classic game, it's almost literally just you boot it up and it's just a legal way to play a ROM of an old game. There are obviously examples of games that do it a little bit more lovingly, like the Megaman collection. You kind of run around to an overworld that looks like a Mega Man level, so it feels a little more integrated, like you're trying to do something. But the amount of history around this, I really felt like I learned a lot about it while also getting to play the game. And especially these early stories are so interesting. Just imagine if there's any like dumb Nintendo game that you play for 5 minutes and say, okay, I'm bored. If you were able to learn all the details around the production and the conversations around it, what they were trying to do, just so cool. And I'd never heard of this game before, but apparently it was pretty important early on. This is the first game in this team's documentary series that they're doing themselves, so I'm super, super pumped for whatever comes out next. Number 4, The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel to The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, which, even though it came out in like 2017, on the top of not just knee-jerk reaction people online, on like journalistic articles and websites and magazines, it is named consistently as the number 1 game of all time. So how do you follow up that game? Before Breath of the Wild, another Legend of Zelda game was constantly referred to as one of the best games of all time, Ocarina of Time. And just like Majora's Mask, the weird game that followed Ocarina of Time, the team, when making a sequel, decided to just lean into the weird. Tears of the Kingdom is a weird game. Its controls are clunky, and there's too much going on. I've been playing video games for a long time, and I would constantly mess up the controls. I can't imagine how this is to a newer player. There's way too much game, but I think that's why it's so special. Breath of the Wild was successful not just because of its characters or the world, but its longevity is in part due to the systems. It kind of took an immersive sim approach where they just had very simple rules and you could rely on them to work. If there was a stick and it got stuck by lightning, it would catch on fire. And for Tears of the Kingdom, they said, okay, you guys like the mechanics and kind of the systems in the game. What if we threw 800 more systems in there? It's a game that is not very accessible. And honestly, it is shocking that a game with this big a budget was able to be made with this weirdness in it. How many other huge budget games of this kind of IP are taking these kind of swings? On top of that, I also like it for another kind of vaguer, heady reason. I always write descriptions of what the setup to the game or movie or whatever is, and I wrote a little bit longer one because I think that it feeds into what I think is interesting about it as well, from a storytelling perspective. In the lowest depths of a cavern from which a growing fog of poisonous gas threatens the health of a nation, the kingdom's princess and her knight discover the source of the deadly blight, an artifact with a great evil sealed inside, and the ancient spells holding the evil captive are waning. The princess and her knight enter the chamber which holds the artifact, their very presence enough to break the frayed spells holding the evil. The burst of magic from the artifact costs the princess her life, and in trying to save her, the knight his sword arm and his enchanted sword. The magic seal broken, ancient cities that were kept hidden and safe by the same magic holding back the evil fall from the sky, battering the landscape, and the poisonous gas quickly spreads across the land, causing megastorms and an upheaval to the ecosystem of the kingdom. The one-armed knight must travel across the land and investigate the long-dead civilization in the sky for clues on how to avenge his princess and save the citizens of the kingdom. I was recently listening to an interview with the author Naomi Alderman, and she was talking about living in New York City right after 9/11. She described the emotional mood from the city, but the thing that struck me was her description of the physical changes that the city went through in the months after and how people acclimated to that to go on with their lives. This is a quote from the interview. "The fire smoldered under the towers for months, And every time the wind blew from south to north across the island, the sky was yellow and you could smell it, like the smell of burning plastic. Every piece of street furniture and signposts covered in missing person flyers, and flyers asking to contact the SPCA if you knew of someone who was missing, who had a pet, because they would go and take care of that pet. So many times in stories, and especially in game stories, the authors are interested in the event itself, but not the ripples into the community and how people acclimate to a cataclysmic event. Tears of the Kingdom is really interesting to me because it takes place on the exact same map as Breath of the Wild. It was actually supposed to be a DLC when it was first being developed. But things have changed. This isn't just a simple, reskin of a map. The game explores how these characters and communities are reacting to these changes in the ecology of the world, into places where it was once hot are now cold. Places are now littered with these things that have fallen down from the sky. The landscape has changed. How are people trying to move on with their lives? One of the main mechanics of the game is just picking up random objects and fusing them together to create other things. You'll chop down a tree, create some logs, fuse them together, make a raft, that type of thing. You're taking these random objects, defamiliarizing them, and then using them to create something to fulfill the task at hand, which a lot of times after something that's a big upheaval, you have to, you can't look at things the same way. You have to use your tools differently. You view the things in the world differently. And there's another layer to this game in that you're being an anthropologist of this ancient civilization, trying to look to the past to see how people survived in a time that is now very relevant to the people that are living in the civilization that has just witnessed another upheaval, which is just narratively really engaging to me. Like Breath of the Wild, I didn't finish this game, but I got what I needed to out of it and really enjoyed my time there. You ready to take a hard left turn? Number 3, Suika Game. From an overly complex game to a game that would be very difficult to make less complex. Suika Game should not be as fun as it is. It's a game where there's just one song on loop and you drop fruit into a box. When two fruit of the same type hit each other, they merge into a bigger fruit, and if that bigger fruit hits another fruit that is the same type, they merge into an even bigger fruit, and so on. There's no win condition outside of there's a top scores. You can reach the largest fruit possible, but that doesn't mean you win. I could sit and have sat and played this game for hours. And I've done that with its dumb song on full blast, repeating the whole time, because it's some sort of witchcraft, because it's incredibly good and never gets old. This is definitely not a perfect game. There's some mechanical stuff in here that I'm like, why is this happening? It feels unfair at times, but I have never gotten angry. I have never gotten mad while playing this. And even if I feel cheated by something, I'm just like, oh, well, it's never, even in the most high stress situation in this game is not stressful at all. But the rewards are so high. And another magical thing about this game is it is just as fun to watch as it is to play. What? I wish I could. And I've sat and thought about it for a long time. But I truly can't come up with a concise answer as to why this game is so good. And I have sat in a room full of people, that looping music on blast, all of us asking the same question, and we all have no clue. I encourage you to just play this game. You'll get it. But be careful, because you might not stop playing it for a long time. Number 2, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon. On the planet Rubicon, corporate-funded armies fight over a valuable resource known as coral, which is held by the locals as sacred. As a lone mercenary, you're thrown into the middle of the war and will either try to understand the truth of the situation or get your paycheck and get out. I think that the gameplay in the Soulsborne series is really fun, but more than that, I love the games because of the kind of anthropological, archaeological storytelling style that they have. So when FromSoft announced that they were going back to their mech roots with this Armored Core 6, I was less concerned of if it would be an action adventure versus if it would be kind of a mech sim, and was more concerned with seeing if they stuck to the storytelling style they had done in their most recent games. I was looking for a layered world with characters in it that I could pick apart. And they did that, but not in a way that I was expecting. Many FromSoft games are accused of being very convoluted, and they are. So I would compare this game's story mostly to Sekiro. Armored Core 6, like Sekiro, has a very straightforward, understandable, on just like a base level story that, upon repeated playthroughs, you start seeing the depths of. It's taking a simple story and making that as 3D as possible. In Armored Core 6, we're not even in an open world or Metroidvania type like maze. You're literally at a select screen selecting missions, and you get exposition before each mission. I love the scale that AAA games are able to push to because of their resources, their manpower, the amount of unique assets they're able to make, the time they have to create it. But I'm often bored by their storytelling styles they decide to use. A good story in any medium, in my opinion, asks its audience to engage with it. Video games being an interactive medium, that engagement is built in. You're going to be playing it somehow or another. And I think a lot of modern AAA games, and a lot of indie games as well, take that for granted. Many games are more interested in showing off or having the audience witness the creative team's imagination than they are inspiring the imagination of the audience. And I think that inspiring the imagination of an audience is something that really resonates with me in FromSoft games. They give me information and ask me to fill in the blanks that's not explicitly stated in the world or the story. There are entire communities that are built around filling in these blanks or discussing it. And I don't think that's an accident. This is a game that's built to be played through 3 times. On the first playthrough, you're as confused as the main character is, this lone mercenary. You're being hired out to missions, and you're just completing them, and the only thing you're really focused on is kind of getting the general story, and then being presented with a mechanical challenge, and that's more of what you're doing than anything. This first run also introduces this interesting guttural response, where because you don't know exactly what's going on, and you're just kind of following orders, you'll be given a mission by a corporation to go destroy a base or something like that. And then the next mission, exactly after it, you'll be hired by the opposite corporation to undo the work that you just did in the previous one. You kind of feel like morally dubious throughout the whole thing. It feels weird. And as the game continues, the stakes for all the characters around you that are in the know escalate. You're just kind of along for the ride. You're like, all right, yeah, sure. And as things slowly get revealed, you're like, okay, I think you're grasping onto, okay, I think I understand. I can see why this is a bigger stakes than it was before. And the story is so straightforward that near the end of the game, you're offered kind of a path, and it's very, very clear which one is the good end and which one is the bad end. And then you do the second playthrough, which is all the same missions again, but you get some alternate options, which flesh out the world even more. The second playthrough is very similar to the first, except now you understand the machinations of how this war is working. You've met these characters before. It's fun to see them interact. You get their introductions. You see the hands of the writer at play as what they're setting up, and you're understanding now the missions that you're going on and what their point is in this fictional war. Even though the second playthrough is mostly like the first, you start to be presented with alternate mission objectives in the middle of missions, which you wouldn't appreciate on a first playthrough because you're just trying to get your bearings. And then now it's like it's adding layers. It's starting to paint in the shadows of the story. these new missions or older missions now have emotional weight to them that they didn't on your first playthrough. And the third playthrough of the game is the most different of all of them. And it offers you from the beginning to be able to do missions from a different perspective entirely. It's a storytelling style that I think is really interesting, where you take something really small and you flesh it out into something really big. This is obviously dealing with like war and planetary destruction and stuff like that. So it's not like the stakes are that low in like a sci-fi scale or like in whatever. That's a huge problem. But the story itself is very straightforward, good versus bad, and fleshing it out is so interesting. This very skeletal story is now really cool, and you get really invested in it, or at least I did. My big complaint is I do wish the gameplay was better. I frequently got bored. You can't accumulate skills during the levels that you will then practice on the boss fights. The boss fights and the normal levels are treated completely differently. Generally in games, you practice skills that the boss is then the test of those skills to see how good you are. But in this game, the practicing and learning and everything occurs from just fighting the boss over and over and over. So there's these crazy spikes in difficulty. But for me, the storytelling style is more than enough to rank this game highly in my book. Before we get to number one, just a few honorable mentions. The Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, which is a visual novel told through tarot card readings by the creators of the Red Strings Club. Pizza Tower, which is a super visually striking Metroidvania, Super Meatboy-y game that is basically if the WarioLand series was created by a sentient blob of Nickelodeon slime. And Dredge, which is a kind of spooky fishing sim / visual novel. On to number one. Number one, Humanity. Humanity is a puzzle platformer where you play the spirit of Shiba Inu herding an infinite parade of humans through a maze of brutalist landscapes. Created in partnership between the synthesasia-obsessed designer of Rez and Tetris Effect, in a design firm that heads up experimental art installations and redesigns public toilets. This is a truly fun, thoughtful puzzle game that plays kind of tertiarily with existential themes and heightens them throughout the game in purely mechanical ways, which is really, really fun. From the very start, the game kind of puts you on your back foot while you're trying to solve these puzzles very like coldly. Each level is this floating island with no walls. There's a doorway, there is the dog, and then there is this beam of light which represents the exit of the level. As soon as the level begins, a stream of people start coming out of this doorway, and they don't stop. They just keep coming, and they're not stopping for anything outside of the barks of your dog, which tell them which direction to go. You're herding them. By the end of the first few levels of the game, thousands of people will have fallen off the edge due to either you weren't fast enough, or you're trying to figure out the puzzle and you're just sitting there, or through neglect. They're falling in a stream like a waterfall if you just let it sit there. There's this narration that goes like, don't worry about it. But you're not really sure how much to believe them or how to feel about it. Any reporting on this game cites the impetus for this game. They quote as saying they wanted to see how many people they could get on the screen at once. And this truly does feel like a very modern game in that respect. There are so many bodies on screen at once. They throw around these people like they're particle effects, and there are these weird, huge set pieces and pieces of visual design that happens with these people in the course of the game that I was literally to myself on the couch multiple times going, wow, because it was so impressive and beautiful and touching at times. And it's just also there's these it's playing with these weird imagery because sometimes you'll be sitting there trying to figure out a puzzle and there's just like people like falling and falling and falling, and you'll zoom out and you'll see this mass of just people writhing. It's like even if something's cute, if you see 1,000 kittens writhing around in a pile, it's weird. In 2019, there's a game that was published that was called Kids, which was so low interface that it was called an interactive animation. It was about crowd mentality, and there was a bunch of like stick figure-y people on screen, and they would fall into holes, etc. Humanity is Kids, the board game. Humanity is cool in its scale, its ambitions, and its execution. It has a bunch of really cool organic set pieces that I'll be remembering for a long time. For all of that, and its approach to using mechanics to heighten the narrative, it makes it my favorite game of 2023. Thank you, Crosley. What was your favorite game of 2023? I know I've got a lot to catch up on. If you like what you saw, you can follow Media Moodboard on Letterboxd or here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back before the end of the year with my best of movies list. Until then, my name's Houston. This is Media Moodboard. Bye.
Accessibility shortcuts.
Thanks, Crosley.